All right, so we just had a pretty major shakeup in the upcoming 2022 Senate election that's going to be taking place in Pennsylvania next year because an absolutely wild character just threw his hat in the ring for this election. So first of all, I don't really know what to even call this guy because he does have the credentials to back up his doctor title, right? He is a real practicing surgeon, right? Or former practicing surgeon. He does have a medical degree to back all of this up, but at the same time, he's also somebody who incessantly pushes pseudoscientific bullshit all the time, whether it's on his show or on his appearances on Fox News, as we're going to get to a couple examples here. But this guy is absolutely wild. So I wanted to play you his campaign advertisement here that he just made recently to announce his Senate bid. But this guy is obviously trying to appeal to different factions within the Republican Party. He's trying to appeal somewhat to the Republican establishment by, portraying himself as professional. And at the same time, he's also trying to appeal to Trumpists with the rhetoric that he is deploying in this, as you are about to see. So let's just go ahead and watch this, and I'll tell you about how absolutely batshit crazy this guy is.
My parents came to America to find a better life, and they did. I attended great universities, raised a family, and became a successful surgeon. I invented a heart valve that saves thousands of lives. Then I started a TV show to advocate for you taking control of your health, and took on the medical establishment to argue against costly drugs and skyrocketing medical bills. But COVID has shown us that our system is broken. We lost too many lives, too many jobs, and too many opportunities because Washington got it wrong. They took away our freedom without making us safer and tried to kill our spirit and our dignity. As a heart surgeon, I know how precious life is. Pennsylvania needs a conservative who will put America first, one who can reignite our divine spark, bravely fight for freedom, and tell it like it is. That's why I'm running for Senate. I'm Dr. Oz, and I approve this message.
Okay, so, listen, the crossovers with the types of rhetoric that he's using and rhetoric that we have seen previously from guys like Donald Trump, it's pretty glaring, okay? He literally says America first. He's appealing, to this idea that we've had our freedoms taken away over the course of the pandemic. And listen, I get it. Washington did fuck up in so many different ways in how we handled the pandemic. But you're going to see in a minute here, when I give you a couple examples of his early comments at the beginning of the pandemic, how he has absolutely no leg to stand on whatsoever in not only critiquing the way that we handled the COVID pandemic, but on top of that, claiming that he cares about the sanctity of life, okay? This guy is an absolute psychopath, as we're about to get to in a second here. But just to give you a little bit more perspective in terms of how this race is unfolding, what it's actually looking like, where his place is in the Republican primary within this. So they say here from CNN, Dr. Oz, a cardiothoracic surgeon and television personality, is running for the U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania as a Republican, according to an op-ed published Tuesday in the conservative Washington Examiner. And they say the 61-year-old Oz will join a Republican field that already includes Philadelphia area businessman and 2018 Lieutenant Governor nominee Jeff Bartos and Carla Sands, who served as a U.S. ambassador to Denmark in the Trump administration. So again, more Trump connections already involved in this race. But another potential Republican candidate is David Mccormick, a former official in the Treasury Department under President George W. Bush. And the race in Pennsylvania is succeeding the race in Pennsylvania to succeed retiring Republican Senator Pat Toomey has been shaken up in recent weeks, primarily by the departure of GOP candidate Sean Parnell, who was endorsed by former President Donald Trump. So again, you see the Trump lane is sort of widening a little bit with the exit of this other Trump-endorsed guy who was in this field, but that's basically the lane that Dr. Oz is trying to occupy, as you can see from the rhetoric that he was deploying there. But now let's get into some of the hilarious cases that he has absolutely lied about in terms of the science that he has been presenting on his show. So just to give you a couple examples, because some of this stuff is really light, some of it is a little bit more serious, but we're going to get to even more egregious and really terrible examples of stuff that he has said over the course of his career. So let's just do a little bit of goofy examples here. So Oz told viewers that green tea coffee extract has scientists saying they found a magic weight loss cure. So again, just kind of quack doctor type stuff. Oz has said that astrological signs may reveal a great deal about our health. So this to me is just kind of stupid, okay? Because, I get that people are into the whole, astrology shit and how it's kind of interesting to see where the correlations are, but it's just that. It's just correlation without causation. So this is the most baseline thing that an actual doctor would never claim, okay? So he is a real licensed doctor. Again, this is why it's kind of confusing, because he is a real licensed doctor. He is a surgeon, but at the same time, he believes that there is a connection between astrological signs and your actual health in reality in a physical way. That to me is just really really stupid and bizarre that you would claim that, unless you're just trying to peddle to a certain audience that you're trying to harness. But they continue here with another couple examples. Oz repeatedly claimed that raspberry ketones are the #1 miracle cure in a bottle to burn your fat. Okay, so again, kind of goofy. I don't really know what the major consequences of these types of things are, but here's one that is a little bit more actually damaging in terms of what he has said. Oz pushed hydroxychloroquine to fight the coronavirus, even though its effects were still unproven. So again, he was one of these conservatives who was shelling hydroxychloroquine, which at the time was sort of like the ivermectin that conservatives were pushing as this, miracle cure, as an alternative to the vaccines, etc. So he's just that kind of guy, all right? So that just gives you a little bit more of a perspective. But in a macro perspective, on his show, I actually found this interesting data where they say that scientists find half the advice, half of it, on Dr. Oz is wrong or has no evidence to back it up. Okay, so here's the actual data that they say, and this is from the British Medical Journal, but they actually went back and looked at a lot of the claims that he is making on his show, and it's basically just a coin toss whether it's going to be actual legitimate medical advice that you could take and be actionable on, or it's just going to be completely made up or not actually peer reviewed or not actually scientifically proven to be accurate. So again, if it's a coin flip on whether or not you're actually putting forward accurate information, that's pretty glaring for a doctor, for a scientist. That's an absolutely horrible ratio to have in terms of getting shit right. But now let's get into the actual psychopathic examples, okay? This is the type of shit that justifies what I was saying earlier when I say this guy has no claim to say that he cares about the sanctity of life or that he would have had a better response to the pandemic, okay? He obviously was railing against lockdowns and that, talking about how they took away our freedoms, maybe even talking about the vaccine mandate in terms of that, but this is what he had to say, okay? This is a video from roughly April 16th in 2020, so right as I guess we were starting to take COVID a little bit more serious at the beginning and we were starting to have lockdowns and stuff like that. Here's what he said, okay? Dr. Oz, schools are a very appetizing opportunity. I just saw a nice piece in The Lancet arguing that the opening of schools may only cost us 2 to 3% in terms of total mortality. And any life is lost, but that might be a trade-off some folks would consider, okay? So this guy said it would be appetizing to reopen schools fully and potentially lose 2 to 3% of children going back to school. 2 to 3% in a population in a country like the United States that has millions and millions of people. We are talking about bare minimum over 1 million, if not a couple million children dying at that rate. Okay, this is what he was saying at the beginning of the pandemic. And thankfully he was wrong, because the actual death toll among our children or our young population in the United States, it's much less than 2 to 3%. But this guy at the time was saying 2 to 3% is acceptable. That's just perfectly fine. We're talking about millions of people. We're talking about millions of children dying, and that's what he said was appetizing. That was an appetizing strategy we may explore. So again, guy is kind of an absolute psychopath on top of just being spectacularly wrong about a lot of his medical shit that he is shelling to people. But again, another psychopathic example, okay? Dr. Oz at the beginning of the pandemic said worry and panic will be worse than the disease itself when talking about COVID. The worry and panic. So I actually watched this clip, and basically his claim was people are stuck in their homes and they are so anxious and they're having panic attacks, and those panic attacks will be worse in the broader picture than everybody getting COVID. Okay, that's what he was basically saying. Worry and panic will be worse than the disease itself. Bro, we've had nearly 1 million people die from this in this country, and that's with vaccines. That's with the lockdown measures that we put in place that he was opposed to. Okay, that's with the mask mandates. That's with potential future vaccine mandates as they're being explored in the courts. But he's saying that worry and panic, the anxiety from it, which I get it, there was an increase in worry and panic and anxiety amongst everybody in the country. Everybody gets that. It's a fucking pandemic, okay? That's pretty obvious. But there's absolutely no world in which panic attacks or anxiety from COVID is worse than COVID itself, okay? You know what makes people anxious? You know what gets people really on edge? When half their family fucking dies from a singular disease because nobody took any measures to prevent them from getting it, okay? I think that might instill a little bit more fear and panic and worry that he's talking about than, people just having to sit at home for a little bit, all right? So this is the type of guy that he is, all right? Spectacularly wrong, dangerously wrong, not the kind of guy who you want to get into a position of power like a U.S. senator? So that leaves us with, what is the alternative? Well, there actually is a pretty good candidate in this race that is leading in the Democratic field and leading overall, all right? So I've talked about this guy before on my channel. His name is John Fetterman, and it is this absolute unit here, okay? He stands at about 6'8", so on top of being good on the policy and good on the substance and good on the rhetoric choices that he uses, on top of that, he's just an absolute unit. So he towers over everybody, and he has this, strong appearance. And believe it or not, in the United States, that actually matters. It might be stupid, but that actually does matter. And having a big physical presence, usually, and a majority of the time in the United States within our electoral system, the taller guy wins, okay? That's just the reality of it. So he does have a physical advantage. He also has an advantage because he is, more importantly, good on the actual policies. So here's from his campaign website. So what John believes. He says a minimum wage should be a living wage of at least $15 an hour. All work has dignity and all paychecks must too. Healthcare is a fundamental human right. Importantly, he doesn't say access to healthcare is a human right. He says healthcare itself is a human right, and he believes in Medicare for all. And he also says that housing, food, and education are also human rights. Climate change is an existential threat. He also believes in the Green New Deal. Weed should be legal nationwide for jobs, justice, veterans, farmers, and revenue. It's time to end the failed war on drugs. Immigration is what makes America America. We need a compassionate response to immigration reform that actually treats immigrants like human beings. Black Lives Matter. John served as the mayor of a city. It's called Braddock. That's more than 80% black and has championed the idea that Black Lives Matter since long before it became a hashtag. And the union way of life is sacred. It's what built this nation, and it must be protected. So this is kind of important to focus in on here a little bit, because the town that he actually is a mayor of, it's called Braddock. He's been there for years and years and years trying to rebuild this town that was basically completely gutted and eviscerated by some of the trade deals, by some of the actions that were taken by the United States political system here that allowed for a lot of these U.S. manufacturing jobs to be shipped overseas, so these massive billion-dollar corporations could go exploit cheap labor in Asia and all around the world instead of keeping those jobs here. So that's the context of where this guy is representing right now. So he does know what it means for these small towns, whether it's in Pennsylvania or anywhere across the country, to get eviscerated by a lot of these neoliberal globalist policies, if you want to call them that. So he actually does back up, not just supporting unions, but he does understand the full context of that and wants to change that dynamic. But they continue here saying that a woman's right to an abortion is non-negotiable. Okay, LGBTQIA communities deserve equal protections under the law. John has always stood for equality and was one of the first elected officials in PA to officiate a same-sex wedding. That's dope as fuck. Get corporate money out of politics. Very important. John refuses contributions from corporate PACs, and he signed the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge. Okay, so listen. I'm not the type of guy who typically goes out there and shills for politicians, all right? I'm not really that interested in the electoral side of things other than to just get mad and yell about how completely broken and dysfunctional this system actually is. But this is a guy who I actually think has a really, really bright future in terms of leading the left in some form, whether it's in the Senate as a senator. And if he actually just sticks to his beliefs as he is outlining them here, and he sticks to the types of rhetoric that he has been using throughout this election, okay? This is not a guy, who spends too much time talking about culture war issues. This is a guy who, similar to Bernie Sanders, knows how to cut through the bullshit, will not take any shit from anybody, and knows how to just focus on the actual substance of the policy issues. So that's why I kind of like this guy, and why I'm willing to come out here and say that I would vote for him 100% if I was able to, if I lived in Pennsylvania. So I fully, recommend you guys, if you live in Pennsylvania, go vote for this guy, go support his campaign in any way, shape, or form, because we got to get a guy like John Fetterman elected instead of having some absolute quack, insane doctor like Dr. Oz, who believes that, hydroxychloroquine was an effective treatment at the beginning of the pandemic before there was any scientific data. A guy who thinks that we should have done full school openings to basically sacrifice a couple million children at the altar of our, supposed freedoms, or whatever the fuck that means, okay? We got to get a guy like John Fetterman to actually win this election. And it's not just going to be up against, whoever comes out of the Republican primary field. We're still up against the Democratic establishment, who don't really like John Fetterman yet, even though he has garnered some sort of respect within liberal circles for how he handled the whole Trump coup attempt. But yeah, so basically, we got to get John Fetterman elected. We got to get him to actually win this Senate race and absolutely destroy and obliterate this absolute quack doctor in Dr. Oz.